I've been driving for rideshares for years, and like most nights, I was out on a quiet, lonely route, preferring the calm of the late hours. But that night was different. It began like any other, me cruising through dimly lit streets when a ride request came from an area near an abandoned service station. I hesitated for just a moment, something about the location felt off, but I shrugged it off. After all, it was just another fare. When I arrived, the area was eerily silent. The service station's flickering neon sign was the only hint of life in an otherwise deserted block. Standing under a weak streetlight was a man in an oversized, worn jacket. His appearance was unremarkable at first, but there was something unsettling in the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a faded cap. I unlocked the door, and without a word, he climbed into the back seat. The silence inside my car was oppressive. I glanced in the rearview mirror and caught his gaze, a steady, unblinking stare that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I tried to start a casual conversation, but he only nodded slowly and remained silent. My heart began to race as I merged back into the dark streets, the low hum of the engine the only sound breaking the tension. After a few blocks, he finally spoke in a hushed tone. He began recounting fragments of a story that felt more like a confession than small talk. He said he had once been a driver himself, a job he abandoned after an incident that left him deeply scarred. His voice trembled slightly as he described a night much like this one, a routine pickup that spiraled into chaos after a robbery at a secluded warehouse. He recalled the flash of police lights, the hurried footsteps of a desperate criminal, and the overwhelming fear that gripped him as he realized that his life would never be the same. Listening to his tale, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. Every so often, he would catch my eye in the mirror, his expression shifting from sorrow to something darker, a mix of regret and menace. It was as if he was silently warning me of dangers lurking just beyond the veil of night. As we drove on, the streets grew even quieter. I could feel my pulse quicken with each passing moment, every shadow and unexpected noise fueling my anxiety. I tried to shake the feeling that we were being watched. At one point, I glanced at the side mirror and thought I saw a figure standing in the distance, half hidden in the gloom. When I looked again, nothing was there, but the unease lingered. The driver's story took another turn as he began murmuring about the weight of secrets and the inescapable nature of one's past. He claimed that on nights like this, the road itself seems to choose its passengers, drawing them into encounters they can't escape. His voice grew quieter and more intense, and I could almost feel the burden of his memories pressing down on the cramped space of my car. Just as I was trying to steady my nerves, my phone buzzed with a news alert. The bulletin detailed a robbery at a local convenience store, only a few minutes away from where I had picked him up. The report mentioned a suspect with a striking resemblance to my passenger. My mind raced. Had I unknowingly given a ride to someone dangerous? The thought made my hands tremble on the steering wheel. Trying to focus on the road, I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror. His eyes seemed to gleam with a secret knowledge, as if he were amused by my mounting fear. In a low voice, he commented, "Sometimes, the night reveals more than we ever want to see." I shivered, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was, enclosed in my own moving little world of uncertainty. As we neared his destination, a dimly lit street corner, I felt a surge of relief mixed with lingering apprehension. I pulled over to let him out quickly. But before I could even open the door, he reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded scrap of paper. With a deliberate slowness that sent chills down my spine, he slid it across the seat toward me. I unfolded the paper carefully. In neat, almost elegant handwriting, it read, "Not all who wander are lost, some are merely running from the shadows." My mind raced, trying to decipher the meaning behind his cryptic message. His eyes met mine again, and in that silent moment, I sensed that he wasn't just a frightened man with a troubled past, he was a harbinger of something far more ominous. Without a word, he stepped out of the car and merged with the darkness, leaving me alone with the unsettling note and a mind full of unanswered questions. I sat there for several minutes, heart pounding, until the familiar sounds of the city began to filter back in. I eventually drove away, shaken and unsure if what I had experienced was a figment of my imagination or a real brush with danger. Later, when I recounted the incident to a friend, I was told about similar reports in the area, mysterious figures, unexplained sightings, and a series of unsolved incidents that had left many locals wary of the night. To this day, that encounter haunts me. It's a reminder that even on the quietest of nights, the unexpected can emerge from the shadows, changing everything in an instant. I still drive late, but now I do so with a heightened sense of caution, aware that sometimes, the road has its own dark secrets waiting to be uncovered. I used to thrive on the constant hum of the city, the clatter of subway trains, the endless chatter on busy sidewalks. Even the blaring horns felt like a part of the urban symphony I once loved. But after one harrowing incident that shattered my sense of safety, every unexpected noise became a dagger to my heart. A few years ago, I was involved in a traumatic accident that left me with a relentless sensitivity to sound. My psychiatrist diagnosed it as a severe form of phonophobia, a condition that made every creak, every whisper of wind, a reminder of that fateful night. I soon realized that the bustling city I once adored had become a prison of constant anxiety. Desperate for silence and healing, I decided to leave everything behind and move to a remote cabin deep in the heart of the Pacific Northwest. I found the perfect refuge in a quiet corner of Oregon, a modest, weathered cabin surrounded by towering pines and shrouded in an almost otherworldly stillness. The cabin was exactly as described in the small online listing, built with sturdy timber beams, a warm stone fireplace, and an interior that smelled of pine resin and old paper. It promised a sanctuary free from the relentless noise of city life, and for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. The first few days were pure bliss. I woke up to birdsong instead of sirens, and the only interruptions came from the whisper of the wind as it rustled through the trees. I spent my days working on my laptop, completely disconnected from the chaos of the outside world. It was during one of these tranquil mornings that I first encountered my neighbor. There was a knock on my creaky cabin door. Expecting a fellow wanderer or perhaps the occasional hiker, I opened the door to find an elderly woman standing there. She had long, silver-streaked hair that fell in disarray around her shoulders, and her piercing blue eyes seemed to look right through me. In her weathered hands, she clutched a basket overflowing with homemade preserves, as if she had stepped out of a bygone era. She introduced herself as Evelyn and explained that she lived just a short walk down a narrow, winding trail that cut through the dense forest. Her manner was both kind and unnervingly direct. As she handed me the basket, she leaned in close and said, "Always keep your lanterns lit, keep your windows shut tight, and your senses sharper than a blade." Her tone left me with more questions than answers, a cryptic piece of advice that felt more like a warning. I accepted the basket with a polite nod, unsure of what to make of her intense gaze. For several nights afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The silence that had initially been so comforting now began to press in on me, especially on stormy nights. One particular evening, when a violent thunderstorm raged outside, I lit a few candles and curled up on the couch with a book. The flickering light and the sound of rain on the cabin's roof should have been soothing, but instead, every clap of thunder sent a shiver down my spine. Not long into the night, as the storm's fury began to subside, there was a sudden, forceful knock at the door. This time, it wasn't the gentle tapping of a neighbor but a harsh, unrelenting pounding that made my heart race. I hesitated, gripping a flashlight in trembling hands before cautiously approaching the door. Peering through the small glass panel, I saw Evelyn again, this time, soaked by the rain, her eyes wide with alarm. She urgently whispered that she had seen a shadow near my woodpile, a presence that shouldn't be there. I stepped outside into the downpour, shining my flashlight into the dark expanse of the woods. The rain blurred my vision, and all I could see were swaying silhouettes of trees. Evelyn's words echoed in my mind. Though I couldn't see anyone, her concern was unmistakable. She urged me to be cautious and then, without waiting for a reply, she hurried back along the trail toward her own isolated dwelling. That incident left me even more unsettled, but I convinced myself it was simply a figment of my overactive imagination. I locked up the cabin securely and tried to return to the fragile comfort of my solitude. However, as the hours wore on, my anxiety only grew. Every creak of the old wood, every gust of wind outside, felt laden with sinister intent. Sometime after midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of a branch snapping just outside my bedroom window. I was a light sleeper, and I knew immediately that it was no ordinary noise. My pulse raced as I crept over to the window. There, illuminated briefly by a flash of moonlight, stood a figure. It was Evelyn again, her form barely visible in the silver glow as she lingered at the edge of the trees. She seemed to be watching something, or someone, beyond my property. Panic gripped me, and I ducked away, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would betray my hiding spot. I spent the remainder of the night in a state of hyper-awareness, every sound amplified in the oppressive darkness. When dawn finally broke, I forced myself to confront the reality of the situation. I approached the door again, this time expecting another cryptic warning. To my dismay, the knock that greeted me was not from Evelyn but from a different presence altogether, a large, imposing man with a rough, weathered face and a thick beard. He peered through the door as if sizing me up, his eyes cold and calculating. I felt a surge of terror and retreated inside, my mind racing with questions about who he was and what he wanted. I barricaded the door and immediately called the police. While I waited, the sound of heavy footsteps and muffled grunts reverberated through the cabin as if the intruder had begun rummaging around. The chaos of breaking glass and splintering wood filled the air, and I huddled in the bathroom, locked away from the pandemonium outside. It felt as though time had stretched on indefinitely, each second a trial of fear and uncertainty. Eventually, the noise subsided as abruptly as it had begun. When the police arrived, they conducted a quick search of the surrounding area, but the intruder had vanished into the dense forest. Their investigation led them to Evelyn's property, where they discovered that her once inviting cabin had long been abandoned. The officers explained that no one had lived there for years, and any signs of recent activity were baffling. It was as if the warnings, the intrusions, and even Evelyn herself were remnants of a past that refused to fade away. I left that cabin shortly afterward, my hope for a peaceful escape from the chaos of my past shattered. Even now, I'm left with more questions than answers. Was Evelyn really a concerned neighbor, or had she been part of something far more sinister? Who was the intruder, and what did he want? I sometimes wonder if the isolation I sought only magnified the hidden dangers lurking in the darkness. To this day, I remain wary of quiet nights and the unpredictable sounds that can shatter even the deepest silence. My experience taught me that even in the midst of solitude, one can never escape the echoes of the past, or the mysteries that hide within the shadows of the present. My name is James, and my girlfriend Olivia and I have been together since our freshman year at college. We met at Stanford, a dream school for me since childhood, even though neither of us originally hailed from California. I grew up just outside Columbus, Ohio, and Olivia in Cincinnati. Our shared Midwestern roots always made us feel like outsiders among the predominantly West Coast crowd. That sense of being different bonded us early on, and one of our cherished traditions quickly emerged, our annual Christmas drive. Every year, we split the holiday between our families. Christmas Eve is spent with my family, where Olivia is always warmly welcomed, and then we embark on our late-night journey to her home, 2 hours away. The drive itself has become a magical ritual, a quiet escape along secluded back roads, flanked by endless fields, clusters of trees, and the occasional farmhouse bathed in soft holiday lights. It's as if the entire world is asleep, leaving us alone with the music that has become our shared obsession. We always crank up our favorite tunes, and there's something profoundly intimate about belting out lyrics together in the solitude of the night. This past Christmas Eve began like any other. After a joyful evening with my extended family, we loaded up the car around midnight. The snow was falling gently, dusting the roads in white, and everything felt perfect as we set off under the calm, starlit sky. For the first half of our drive, the comforting hum of our favorite songs and the rhythmic patter of snow against the windshield lulled us into a peaceful state. Then, unexpectedly, the tranquility shattered. While the music played on, my phone began to ring. At first, I brushed it off as another scam call. Those are all too common these days. But as the call came through a second time, a hint of annoyance crept in. I glanced over at Olivia, who raised an eyebrow in silent curiosity. Reluctantly, I let the call go to voicemail and tried to shake off the irritation. Not even a minute later, my phone rang again. This time, my frustration got the better of me. I snatched it from the console and answered sharply, exclaiming a curt greeting into the phone. There was only static on the other end for a moment, until a deep, calm voice spoke. "Hello, James," the voice said, and I froze. It was impossible not to notice the unsettling familiarity in that tone. Before I could muster a reply, the voice continued, reciting details about my life, my full name, bits of my address, things that only someone close to me would know. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of how a stranger could have such intimate knowledge of me. I glanced at Olivia, whose face had drained of color. The car, once filled with the warmth of holiday music, now felt like a confined space filled with creeping dread. I attempted to regain control of the situation by asking, "Who are you and what do you want?" The voice paused for a few long, agonizing moments before answering in a measured tone that sent shivers down my spine. "I'm not calling for you, James. I'm calling for Olivia." That single sentence broke through any remaining barrier of rational thought. I felt an icy chill spread through my body, and in that moment, the car seemed to narrow, the road stretching out ominously before us. In a desperate bid to break the mounting tension, I tried to end the call, but it persisted, its static-filled presence lingering. In the background, I quickly pulled over onto the side of the snowy road, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. The biting cold outside was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I glanced over at Olivia, whose eyes were wide with terror and confusion. Why would someone know so much about us? I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. Olivia remained silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the dark expanse of the road ahead. Then, in a shaky voice, she said she didn't feel safe. I couldn't fault her, every instinct screamed that this was more than just a prank or a case of mistaken identity. Despite my inner urge to confront the caller, I reluctantly resumed driving, the silence in the car now heavy with unspoken fear and uncertainty. For the remainder of the drive, the phone lay silent on the console, its dark screen a constant reminder of the intrusion. The radio stayed off, and the usual joy of our shared music was replaced by a numb vigilance. My mind raced with questions. Who was that man? How did he learn details about our lives? And most importantly, why had he chosen that moment, on our cherished holiday drive, to reach out? Every bump in the road, every gust of wind seemed to echo his voice. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, not by strangers on the road, but by someone who knew every detail of our lives. As we neared Olivia's house, the normally festive glow of holiday lights felt tainted by an inexplicable sense of dread. I tried to explain to her that it was probably nothing more than a prank call, but her trembling hands and the fear in her eyes told me that she wasn't convinced. We parked the car in the driveway, and for a long while, neither of us moved. It was as if the events of the night had etched themselves into the very air around us. Eventually, we exchanged a few whispered words about calling the police, but both of us knew that there would be little they could do. The details the caller shared were too specific, too personal, and we were left with nothing but unanswered questions and a lingering sense of violation. In the weeks that followed, the incident replayed over and over. In my mind, I questioned every conversation we'd ever had, every secret shared in confidence. Was it possible that someone from our past was trying to manipulate us, to drive a wedge between us on a night we both held dear? The unanswered calls stopped, but the chilling impact remained. I began to notice small things, a shadow passing by our window when we thought we were alone, a reflection in the dark that seemed out of place. Olivia, once the picture of composure, now jumped at every unexpected noise, her eyes constantly searching for an unseen threat. Friends and family tried to reassure us that it was probably just a cruel prank or an error by some automated system. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister at play. Even now, months later, every time my phone buzzes with an unknown number, my heart skips a beat, and I brace myself for that familiar, haunting voice. Our once beloved Christmas drive has become a memory tainted by fear, a reminder that sometimes, the things we cherish most can be used against us in ways we never imagined. I continue to wonder who that caller was, how he came to know so much about us, and what he truly wanted. In the quiet of the night, as the wind rustles through the trees and the world seems to sleep, I can't help but feel that somewhere out there, someone is watching, waiting for the right moment to call again. I've learned to live with the uncertainty, though it has left an indelible mark on our lives. Trust, once a given in our relationship, now feels like something fragile and fleeting. The memory of that night, the sound of that disembodied voice, will forever echo in the corners of my mind, a stark reminder that even in the midst of holiday cheer, darkness can find its way in.